married off for $50. What she faced at the ranch shocked all. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The wind swept across the Wyoming plains like a blade, sharp and merciless. It rattled the crooked shutters of the farmhouse and pushed icy fingers under the door frame where Hannah Lee stood. At only 18, she was about to be handed away like a parcel, her life sealed in a bargain she had never agreed to. Her shawl clung tight around her shoulders, but no wool could block the truth, pressing against her chest. Behind her, the fire crackled, throwing sparks as her uncle leaned lazily against the hearth. His face, hard and weathered by bitterness, held none of the softness of family. To him, Hannah was not kin, not a niece to protect or cherish, but an expense, another mouth he was too tired to feed. He spat into the flames, then eyed the tall man across from him, Samuel Carter. Samuel was 36, broad-shouldered and silent, his trail coat dusted with snow. A widower, father of 3, and master of land carved out of wilderness, he was a man who wore sorrow in his silence. He removed his hat, gray eyes fixed and steady. He had not asked for Hannah's consent. He had not needed to. The deal was already struck. Her uncle's voice sliced the air. She's untouched. Raised her on beans and chores, not ribbons. Strong enough to work and young enough to give you sons. $50 and the bull makes a square. The pouch of coins clinked against the table final as a gavel. Samuel nodded, once slid the deed to the bull forward and turned toward the door. Hannah's breath hitched, but no words came. What could she say? Her choices had been cut away long before this moment. She followed into the storm because there was nothing left behind worth staying for. The wagon was plain, covered with canvas that sagged at the edges. Samuel offered no hand, no blanket, not even a word as she climbed in. The door shut and the world dulled to muffled silence. The horses strained against the snow hooves, grinding over the frozen ruts. Hannah folded her hands in her lap, stiff and still. She did not cry. Tears would only freeze before they fell. By the time the wagon reached the Carter ranch, the land spread wide and bleak, a frozen sea dotted with fences and a weathered barn. The 2-story house stood stern against the wind, its boards gray and groaning its windows, dark with the memory of loss. Samuel helped her down with a short nod, then walked to the barn without a backward glance. Alone, Hannah stepped into the house. The air inside was sharp with silence, colder than the Wyoming winter. 3 children stood in the hall like wary sentinels. The youngest, Annie, barely 3, clung to her brother's hand. Eli, 6, held his jaw tight, his small frame stiff with the weight of protection. Behind them stood Micah, 8 years old, already carrying himself with the posture of a man. Their eyes were wide-guarded, measuring this stranger who was now supposed to fill a role none of them wanted replaced. "Hello," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling despite her effort. Annie sucked her thumb. Eli looked at the floor. Micah turned and walked away. That night, the silence of the house pressed down on her like a stone. No laughter, no warmth, only the groan of old boards and the echo of what once had been. Hannah lay awake in the small room given to her, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening for sounds of life. None came. The days that followed blurred together with chores she scarcely knew how to do. Hauling water from a stubborn pump, scrubbing floors until her knees ached, chopping vegetables and trying not to burn the bread in a stove that seemed to mock her efforts. The chickens scattered when she entered the coop, and the cows shifted uneasily when she came near. Even the house seemed to resist her. The children kept their distance. Annie hid behind chairs. Eli hovered at windows. Micah spent long hours in the barn chopping wood far past dusk. Samuel, for his part, neither scolded nor guided. He rose early, worked the ranch, and returned with a face unreadable. He spoke little, his silence as steady as the snow that fell day after day. Yet in that silence, small things began to appear. A note pinned beside the stove. Oak burns longer than pine. Another left by the pantry. Eli won't eat carrots. Use beans instead. One morning she found a scrap of paper tucked under a chipped bowl. You don't have to do it all. Just try. She stared at the words longer than she should have, heat blooming in her chest. Samuel never spoke of the notes, never admitted they were his, but she knew. And though he never praised her openly, she discovered chores half finished in the evening were mysteriously completed by dawn. Bread dough she had abandoned was baked into warm loaves by morning. The firewood she forgot to carry inside was stacked neatly by the hearth. The house remained quiet, but slowly, the silence felt less like judgment and more like endurance. The smallest child, Annie, would sometimes toddle near and peek at her from behind a chair. Eli once took bread from her hand without recoiling. Even Micah, who kept his distance, left a painted pine cone on her nightstand after she baked honey bread and left it by his door. For the first time since she had arrived, Hannah exhaled without trembling. But still, she was not wife, not mother, not even kin. She was a transaction, a shadow, moving through a house that did not yet claim her. And though she did not voice it, the thought lingered in her heart. Would she ever truly belong here? The days at the Carter Ranch began to stretch long and uncertain, stitched together by chores and silence. Hannah learned to rise before the sun, the pale gray of dawn her only companion, as she set water to boil or kneaded bread that often burned at the edges. She tried to fit herself into the rhythm of this house, but the rhythm resisted her like a song she did not know the tune to. Samuel remained a presence more than a partner. He moved through the house like a shadow, steady, quiet, deliberate. He didn't criticize her mistakes, but neither did he guide her openly. Still, there were traces of his care, unfinished tasks, mysteriously completed firewood stacked neatly after she forgot notes appearing near the stove with bits of advice. He never admitted they were his, but Hannah knew. His silence, though heavy, did not feel cruel. It felt like a man who had buried too much and forgotten how to dig it out again. The children, meanwhile, were slow to thaw. Annie still clung to her thumb, watching from corners with wide, solemn eyes. Eli, the middle child, hovered protectively near his sister, but seldom spoke above a murmur. And Micah, the eldest, kept his distance with arms crossed, jaw set, as if daring her to take a place that did not belong to her. One cold evening, little Annie's forehead burned with fever. Panic might have undone Hannah, but there was no space for panic here. She boiled water, crushed mint leaves, soaked cloths, and placed them gently on the child's brow. She curled beside her in bed, given warmth where the fire failed. For 3 nights she stayed awake, humming soft melodies she barely remembered, from her mother whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone heard. When Annie whimpered with thirst, Hannah dripped honey water on her cracked lips. On the third night, Hannah glanced toward the frosted window and froze. Outside stood Samuel. Snow clung to his coat, his face pale in the moonlight. He did not enter, did not speak, only watched her rock his daughter in her arms like something priceless. His gray eyes had changed, softened in a way that startled her. By morning, Annie's fever broke. She opened her eyes weak but alive and whispered through parched lips, "Thank you, Mama Hannah." The words struck Hannah's heart with such force she almost wept. For the first time since her arrival, she felt the weight of belonging pressed gently, not cruelly. But with each step forward, there were still shadows. One night after the children slept, she walked past the barn and overheard voices. Samuel stood inside with a ranch hand lantern casting long shadows. The man laughed harshly, mocking Samuel for taking in such a young bride. "She can't be more than 18, he sneered. "Bet she keeps you warmer than the firewood, eh?" Hannah's blood chilled. She waited for Samuel to silence the insult to defend her name, but his reply came low and even I took her for convenience. "Nothing more. She tends the house cares for the children, that's all." The words cut deeper than any winter wind. She turned away, her breath ragged, her chest hollow. Back in the kitchen, she wrote a note with trembling hands. "If I am only a shadow, let me disappear into the snow." Beside it, she laid the only thing she had ever claimed as hers, a leather belt Samuel had once repaired without being asked. She wrapped her scarf high and stepped into the storm. Eli was the first to notice her absence. He woke in the night calling softly for her. When she did not answer, his voice broke into sobs. His cries woke Annie, and soon both children wailed. Micah stumbled downstairs confused until Samuel appeared. His eyes landed on the note, then the belt, and his face went white as bone. Without a word, he threw on his coat, grabbed his rifle, and charged into the snow. His boots struck the frozen ground like a vow. The storm swallowed him as he rode hard into the night, following faint tracks that nearly disappeared with every gust. His jaw clenched, his heart hammered not with anger, but with fear, the kind of fear he had buried for 3 years and thought he would never feel again. When dawn broke pale and bitter, he found her. Hannah sat by a frozen stream, curled in on herself, her scarf crusted with frost. Her lips were pale, her body trembling with cold. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with pain and disbelief. Samuel dropped to one knee in the snow before her. His voice came rough, broken. "I didn't mean for you to hear that. I said it to shut him up, to keep him from mocking you. But in trying to protect your name, I hurt you instead." Her hands shook in her lap. She couldn't find words. "I don't know how to love right," he confessed, eyes burning. "When Clara died, I locked the door on my heart and threw away the key. Safer that way, or so I thought. But then you came. Without asking for a thing, you gave everything. You made Rosie laugh again. You helped Eli sleep through the night. Micah, he watches you like he's afraid you'll vanish." His shoulders trembled. "You made this house breathe again, and I never once said thank you." Hannah's lips parted, her voice a whisper. "I didn't want you to love me, I just wanted to matter." His eyes met hers, fierce and unflinching. "You do. More than you know." Something in her broke, then not from pain, but release. Tears slipped down her cheeks as he reached for her hand, and in the shelter of his arms the cold melted away. The weeks after that snowy night carried a different weight in the Carter household. The air remained cold, But the silence between Hannah and Samuel was no longer the same. It wasn't an empty hush anymore. It was filled with things unsaid, with glances that lingered, with the slow recognition that something fragile but real had begun to grow. Samuel, who had once moved through the house like a shadow, began to reveal slivers of himself. He showed Hannah the ridge where the cattle grazed. In summer, the old orchard that had withered after a late frost, and the clearing where wildflowers still bloomed in defiance of the wind. One morning, he took her to a grove beneath a twisted oak tree. At its base rested a stone marker carved with a name, Clara Carter, beloved wife and mother. She loved this place, he said, his voice low. Said it felt more like heaven than any church pew ever could. Hannah folded her hands, respecting the weight of his grief. She said nothing, but her silence carried the reverence he needed. That evening, he handed her a small cloth bundle. Inside lay a string of pearls, faintly yellowed but polished with care. It belonged to my mother, Samuel explained. She gave it to Clara on our wedding day. I didn't give it to you before, because I didn't see us as a marriage. I saw it as survival. His eyes met hers, steady, earnest. But now I see more. Hannah's breath caught as she clasped the pearls around her neck. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a recognition, a quiet vow. For the first time, she felt she was not just surviving here, but being chosen. But the land had its way of testing any peace. It happened on a stormy afternoon when the sky darkened without warning and the horses grew restless. Eli stumbled into the yard, his knees scraped, sobbing that Micah had shoved him away from a spooked horse. "He saved me," the boy cried. But the horse, Samuel, was already mounted by the time Hannah gathered Eli into her arms. Fear clawed at her chest as she followed on foot, her skirts soaked with mud. When they reached the pasture, Micah lay crumpled in the dirt, motionless, his temples streaked with blood. Samuel dismounted with a cry that seemed torn from his very bones. He lifted his son into his arms, the boy limp boots dangling like dead weight. "Micah," his voice broke. "No, no, no." The ride back to the house was a blur of pounding hooves and prayer. The doctor came and went, his face grim. "The boy is young, strong, but the head, sometimes it heals, sometimes it doesn't. All you can do is wait." The house fell into suffocating silence. Samuel couldn't bear to sit by the bed. Every time he looked at Micah, it was as if the world collapsed inside him. "I never should have let him work the corral," he muttered, once a voice ragged. "He's just a boy. I wanted to make him strong, but I broke him." "You didn't," Hannah said softly, laying a hand on his arm. "He tried to save his brother. That's strength." But Samuel only shook his head, retreating into his grief. It was Hannah who kept vigil. Night after night she sat by Micah's bed, holding his hand, whispering stories of coyotes and starlight, praying words she wasn't sure she believed. Annie left drawings by the pillow. Eli slept with Micah's boots beside his bed. But it was Hannah's voice that filled the silence. "You're not allowed to give up, Micah Carter. Not when we finally learned how to love again." On the fourth night, when the wind outside stilled and the lamps flickered low, Micah stirred. His hand twitched. Hannah gasped, leaning close. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. "Micah," she whispered, tears brimming. "Can you hear me?" His gaze found hers, blurred but real. And then in a voice raspy but clear, he asked, "Mama, did you cry for me?" Her hands flew to her mouth as sobs shook her. She nodded, unable to speak. At the doorway, Samuel staggered back against the wall, pressing his fist to his chest, as if holding his heart in place. His son had come back, but more than that, he had chosen her. The word mama echoed through the house like a blessing, filling the emptiness with something warm, something unbreakable. The weeks after Micah's awakening unfolded with a gentler rhythm. The Carter house, once filled with silence, began to hum with small but steady sounds. Annie's laughter echoing down the hallway, Eli's voice asking endless questions at the supper table, Micah's footsteps returning to the barn, cautious but determined, and always in the background, Hannah's presence weaving itself into the fabric of their days. Samuel noticed it most in the quiet moments, how Annie nestled against Hannah's lap during stories by the fire, how Eli sought her nod of approval before feeding the hens, how Micah, still slow to trust, lingered just a little longer in the kitchen doorway, when Hannah baked honey bread as though the smell itself anchored him to her. Each of these small signs spoke louder than words. The children were no longer only his, they were becoming hers too. When the first thaw came, Samuel led Hannah to the field, where the wildflowers swayed in unruly colors. Beneath the twisted oak, where Clara's ashes had been scattered, he waited. His vest pressed his shirt white and clean for the first time in years. Hannah walked toward him, her dress simple but graceful, Annie clutching her hand, Eli carrying a crooked boutonniere, and Micah standing tall, vest buttoned tight. There were no musicians, no crowds, no elaborate procession. Only the whisper of wind, the laughter of children, and the low voice of a traveling preacher who spoke of second chances. Samuel's hands trembled as he held Hannah's. "I buried my heart under this tree," he said, voice rough but steady. "But you came and made it bloom again. You're not just the woman I married. You're the home I thought I'd never have." Hannah blinked back tears, her own words a quiet vow. "I wasn't looking for a family. I didn't know how to be anyone's wife or mother. But you, Samuel, gave me the chance to try. And your children, they taught me how to stay." Their kiss was simple, but the children cheered, petals swirling in the breeze as if the land itself rejoiced. For the first time, the Carters stood together, not as a family fractured by loss, but as one bound by new hope. That evening, they shared a modest feast, roast chicken, warm bread berry pie, and the house filled with something it had long been denied: laughter. The walls that once echoed grief now carried voices soft and full of life. But peace is rarely left undisturbed. Just as twilight stretched across the horizon, a wagon creaked into view. An old man stepped down, slowly, shoulders hunched, hat clutched against his chest. Hannah froze. It was her uncle. Time had hollowed him. His cheeks were sunken, his hands shook as though the years themselves weighed too heavy. He cleared his throat, his voice roughened by guilt. "I heard tell there was a wedding, and I just wanted to say, I did you wrong, girl. Sold you like you were nothing but a sack of flour. God knows I've paid for it every day since." Samuel stepped closer, his posture protective but silent. The children drew near, wary of the stranger. Hannah stood still, her heart pounding. The memories of that winter night returned: the pouch of coins, the clink of a deed, the sound of the door closing behind her. Her uncle's eyes glistened. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it out loud before I die." Hannah swallowed hard, her voice trembling but clear. "You took away my choice, my voice. You sold me as if I were a burden to be rid of. But that road, the one you forced me down, it led me here." She paused, searching his face. "I forgive you, but I will not forget." The old man bowed his head, tears streaking his worn cheeks. "That's fair," he whispered before turning back toward his wagon. Samuel slipped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured. "I did," she whispered back. "Not for him, for me." They stood together as the wagon creaked away, the children clinging to her skirts, Samuel's hand firm at her side. The shadows of the past had returned, but they no longer held her captive. Hannah had chosen forgiveness, not to absolve the guilty, but to free herself from chains she had never asked to wear. That night, as the fire crackled warmly and the children dozed near the hearth, Hannah rested her head on Samuel's shoulder. For the first time, she felt not only like she belonged, but like she had taken back the story once stolen from her. Spring swept over the Wyoming plains like a cleansing breath. The hard crust of snow softened into rivulets that cut through the pastures, and the grass rose in shy shoots green against the thawing earth. For the Carters, the season brought with it more than just renewal of the land. It brought the promise of a life remade. One morning, while the sky still blushed with early dawn, Hannah stood barefoot in the field, her ivory dress clinging damp from a soft spring rain. Her hands rested gently over the curve of her belly, life stirring within her, fragile yet fierce. Samuel joined her, his boots sinking into the wet soil as he tilted her chin toward the sky. "I lost one good woman to heaven," he murmured, raindrops sliding down his face. "But God in his mercy gave me another, not just for me, but for all of us." Tears mixed with the rain as Hannah leaned into his chest. "You didn't just save me, Samuel. You gave me a home." That afternoon, the family gathered beneath the twisted oak, the one that shaded Clara's resting place. Together they planted a sapling beside it, a white cotton tree with blossoms soft and pale. Samuel pressed the soil firm around its base, Annie patting the dirt with her tiny palms, Eli sprinkling water with careful seriousness, and Micah standing tall, his hand steadying the trunk. "A promise in bloom," Hannah whispered, her voice carrying on the breeze. "Let it grow." Samuel added, his hand covering hers. Through storm and drought alike, the seasons turned and the promise held. The house that had once stood cold and silent now rang with life. Annie filled the halls with giggles, Eli with endless questions, and Micah with a quiet strength that seemed older than his years. Samuel no longer moved like a man weighed down by grief, but like someone who had finally found a reason to look forward instead of back. Neighbors noticed the change. Where once the Carter Ranch had seemed a somber place, it now welcomed visitors with warmth and the smell of fresh bread. Travelers spoke of the woman with gentle eyes who tamed the silence of a house in mourning. And the children, no longer shadows of loss, stood proudly beside her, calling her mama without hesitation. Hannah often thought of the night she had walked into the snow ready to vanish. The memory haunted her less with time, not because it faded, but because of what had come after. Samuel's broken confession, Micah's first fragile word of mama, the laughter by the hearth, the vows spoken under the oak. These moments had stitched themselves into her heart, mending what had been torn. And when her uncle's face returned to her in memory, his hollow eyes, his quivering voice, she remembered the strength it took to forgive him. Forgiveness had not erased the past, but it had unchained her from it. By letting go of his hold, she had claimed her own life freely. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Samuel brought Hannah back to the ridge overlooking the pasture. The cattle moved lazily in the distance, the cotton tree swayed beside the oak, its blossoms catching the wind. "You changed this place," Samuel said, his voice roughened with emotion. "I thought this land would bury me with my grief. But you made it breathe again. You made me breathe again." Hannah smiled, resting her hand on his. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us learning together how to keep living, how to keep loving." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I reckon second chances don't come easy, but when they do, they're worth every hard mile." As twilight deepened, the children ran laughing through the grass, their voices bright against the fading sky. Hannah's heart swelled as she watched them, her belly stirring with the life yet to come. For the first time in years, she felt her future stretch out, not as a sentence, but as a promise. The Carter Ranch, once bound by sorrow, now stood as proof that broken people could build something whole. If this story stirred something deep in you, let it be this: even in the harshest winters of life, love can take root and bloom again. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it frees the heart to step into tomorrow unshackled. And second chances, though they may come late, though they may be born from pain, can become the greatest blessings of all. Do you believe in second chances? Have you ever seen love grow where you thought nothing could survive? Share your story in the comments below. And if you want more tales of quiet devotion, fierce hearts, and hope found on the wild frontier, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because under the wide American sky, love never rides easy, but it always proves worth the ride.